Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Mechabellum video, as we this time will go over all 16 units in game, their generic roles, what they counter, what they get countered by, and what kind of units they synergize well with. Those are all just some basic layouts. In-game positioning and so on can work around a lot of these things, but we're gonna start now with the first basic unit here, and that is the Fang. The Fang is a unit that you will see a lot, as it is one of few 100 point units, and it is one of two really numerous units, as it comes with 18 Fangs per squad, and these are really just there to do basic stuff. The Fang is here to be numerous and to die most of the time, and to escort your other slow units. One of the most important facts, especially in comparison to the Crawler, is that the Fang is really slow and that it has a ranged attack. And that makes it synergize well with other ranged attack units that are slow. It is good versus the Marksman, versus the Steel Ball, versus the Phoenix, versus the Melting Point. And not because it deals a lot of damage to these units, but because it dies slowly to these units. It's really good against units that only have a single attack. For 100 points, you get to eat 18 shots out of a Marksman, for example, before you're dead. If you have the portable shield upgrade, you even get 36 shots out of a Marksman before all your Fangs are dead. And that for 100 point is a really, really important ability, as this allows your other units to deal the damage. It is, on the other side, obviously bad against everything that does a lot of AoE damage and takes out a lot of unit models at once, which are the Vulcan, the Rhino, the Mustang, the Arclight, and the Stormcaller. And then it synergizes well with other small, slow units that have a longer range and that can stay behind the Fang. And those are the Marksman, the Arclight, and the Fortress. To some extent also synergizes well with the Fang, as it also can shield the Fangs, and then the Fangs actually potentially can deal damage, plus it can spawn Fangs, so all upgrades to the Fangs also go well with the Fortress in that regard. And its staying in formation is a really big advantage over the next unit, which is the other really numerous one, the Crawler. This one has even 24 models per unit, and it is the other small swarm unit, which has kind of the polar opposite on the other stats. So it is really fast, it is melee, it is ground only, and yeah, that allows it to really get onto the enemy. It also doesn't stay in formation well, it just swarms the enemy there. Yeah, its role is in general similar though, as it is there to tank for other units. Here, tanking more for the melee units, staying close to them, staying in formation, as having unit concentrations in this game is really important. And yeah, it also can deal a bit more damage potentially than the Fang when it gets close, if it gets close. It has some abilities that help with that, like the Subterranean Blitz. It is pretty good against other Crawlers if the enemy doesn't go for the Replicate upgrade and yours have higher level. But the real units it's good at are also the Marksman, the Steel Ball, and the Phoenix, in that it tanks. It can't deal damage back to the Phoenix, unlike the Fang. And it is bad versus the Vulcan. Obviously, the flamethrowers just melted. Rhinos also countered hard. Mustangs, with especially once they have the AoE upgrade, and the Arclight. The Arclight also fantastic here. It synergizes well with the other two close range units, especially Steel Balls and Rhinos, and shields them from single target damage units really well, and attacks at the same time. Mustangs also can be decent with it, though that is not a direct synergy. And then we come to the first big unit, and that unit is our first giant unit, and that is the Overlord. The Overlord is also our first flying unit, which already makes it pretty nice against half of the units which are ground only, as it is a pretty versatile unit. It does deal high damage with each attack, and it does a bit of AoE, so that can deal damage and can deal with every kind of unit. And its adaptability really is its major strength, as it also has a lot of abilities that you can load it out with, making it the perfect fit for your composition, as it has different loadouts for really different purposes. And yeah, it is pretty good against the Wasp, as those small flyers don't deal much damage and it can kill them off quite nicely. It is pretty good against Stormcallers, as Stormcallers can't hit it. And it is bad against melting points, which are really good, like against Marksman and against Phoenix. All those anti-large units are especially good against the Overlord, as the Overlord even has less hit points, so it does die quicker than other giants. And it is also potentially bad against the Mustang if the Mustang has the extra upgrade. It synergizes well with Phoenixes and with Wasps, the other two flyers. If you get a flying only setup, it can be really strong, especially if you have the aerial CP. So yeah, those can go well, but the usual way of the Overlord is just an air transition if the enemy is crown only, to really hit them hard and then deal 400 damage if your Overlord survive. Like, the Overlord transition can be really, really scary and catch a lot of enemies off guard. That is their main point here. So yeah, this is the Overlord. Next unit is the Stormcaller. And the Stormcaller is a big, really long range rocket launcher, the longest base range in the game. Deals a lot of AoE, so, and is itself really slow, but it doesn't need to maneuver most of the time, as it is really strong against stuff on the ground, and especially against slow-moving targets on the other side, like Fangs, Sledgehammers, Arclights, even Marksmen. It's pretty good at against, as it has more range, and if it hits them, those low hit point units die quite quickly. But it is not as good against flyers, as it can't hit them, so it is bad versus Phoenixes especially, as they can kill these guys off quite quickly. Rhinos and Crawlers to a specific part as well. Rhinos because they tank pretty well against the AoE damage. You can work a bit against that with some upgrades. And Crawlers because they are actually too fast to be directly hit if they are moving, and they also throw off the targeting of the Stormcaller quite often, focusing on the wrong unit. So Crawlers can potentially be a counter, though they're not a direct counter. Synergy, in my eyes, it synergizes well with units that hold the line quite nicely for a long while. So Fangs and Sledgehammers, really good combination there. They keep the enemy in place, and they give the Stormcaller the time to really do the damage that it needs to do. So yeah. But in general, it's more a unit about positioning and numbers, and the more enemy target there are, the better the Stormcaller is. So yeah, let's move on to the next target unit, which is the Sledgehammer, which is a really slow but tanky boy. It has tank there, and that is exactly what it is. It is a pretty decent all-rounder. It has relatively high damage. It does AoE. But yeah, it's good in my eyes versus units that it tanks really well against, especially once you get the heal and the damage sharing. It can be pretty solid against any ground unit that tries to kill it. But especially Arclights, Vulcans, and Fangs don't really do much against this. And the Vulcan especially, will shoot a lot of shots here without dealing much damage. It is bad against units that can overwhelm its hit points nicely, like the Steel Ball, like the Phoenix. The Fortress also dealing a lot of damage to this. And if you get the damage sharing upgrade, also the Melting Point can melt them really quickly. It synergizes well with any unit that needs a lot of tanking in front. Marksman, Phoenix, Stormcaller, those go really well there. And the Fang also synergizes decently with it because they tank different things a bit, and then you can create a really strong front line with them. But that's not a direct, they profit from each other, but they do their job together really well for other units behind them. So yeah, that is the Sledgehammer. Next unit is the Hacker. And the Hacker is a really special unit, as it yields enemy units with a relatively slow attack that also takes a while. So it is better against large targets. And it is a really unique one that you really want to have in unique scenarios where the enemy has not many small units. The lower the hit points of the enemy unit, the faster it steals it as well, and so on. It is really situational, but in my eyes, it's really good against the Arclight, the Marksman, and the Melting Point. And it's bad versus Fangs and Crawlers because they just overwhelm it. And the synergy, also a bit complicated, but I would say it's good with the Vulcan. If the Vulcan like melts away the Fangs and Crawlers really quick, then the Hacker really can shine against all the remaining bigger targets of the enemy, and where it then can steal them. So yeah, Hacker and Vulcan, the synergy there, that I would say is something. But in general, it's a unit that is more about the specific map setup and unit positioning than it is about hard counters and stuff. Then we go up to the Arclight, which is a single bot with a big AoE blast attack. And yeah, the AoE obviously makes it good against mass units. So it is good against crawlers, fangs, mustangs, and with the anti-aircraft upgrade, also good against wasps. Obviously, otherwise it can't attack air, so then it is pretty bad against wasps. But if you get that, it does great AoE against wasps. And it is bad against steel bolts, which melt it away really quickly and also don't take much damage. Bad against marksmen, which snipe it hard, and against sledgehammers because it doesn't deal much damage there. And phoenixes also counter it pretty nicely. It synergizes well with fangs because it's also slow and can really stay in formation. And if the enemy has a fang or crawler wall, you can help your fangs to shoot through that. And it also goes well with marksmen as they are also having a similar speed and a similar range, so they can really stick well together. And these guys do the crowd control, and then the stuff that does remain, the marksman snipes away. So yeah, that's the Arclight. And let's go on to another long-range unit, and this is the Phoenix. The Phoenix is a really strong air unit. It has a really strong single target attack, but you spawn 2 of them, unlike Marksman or Arclight. You get 2 of them for each unit, and that makes them really good at late game scaling, better than the Marksman, and especially together with the Quantum Reassembly ability and the Elite Marksman, it has an insane late game scaling, which is one of the biggest parts about the Phoenix. If the game goes long and you level your Phoenixes up, and you get a lot of Phoenixes, these 2 abilities together with the respawn and the heavy hitting make these guys super scary. It is good versus sledgehammers, who are relatively far forward and get killed off quite easily one shot. Arclights, steel bolts, and marksmen, in that they outscale them. In the early game, the marksman has a bit more range and can beat the phoenixes quite often. But in the late game, it outscales the marksman, and that is where it then really starts to shine. It is back against mustangs, especially if they have the anti-air upgrade. Fangs, because it just wastes its ammo there, and wasps. And against crawlers can't hit it back, but it is also just a waste of ammo here for the phoenixes to shoot at enemy crawlers. So yeah, let's go on to the next big boy, as we have arrived at the fortress. And the fortress is the tankiest base, has the biggest base hit points in the game, with 44,000 base hit points, which describes its role pretty nice. It also has really high damage, with relatively slow firing guns though, so it's heavy hit point, heavy DP, slow unit. And its abilities are really important for its role, as well as it can create the barrier, it can create the fang summoning, and then it has a lot of others that can give it a bit more damage, can give it a bit more armor, upgrades, which play well with its role. In my eyes, it is really good against low DPS units, or like units that like really want to shoot constantly, and then the fortress can tank it, like the Mustang. The Rhinos also not really doing much against it. The Arclight and the Sledgehammer. These all don't do much. Melting Points, obviously really strong against the fortress, and Steel Bolts as well, as their beam damage does stack up over time, and then eventually the fortress still will just blow up. Phoenix is also pretty strong from long range, dealing high damage. And it synergizes well with fangs, as it also can spawn fangs, so and the spawned fangs have the same upgrades as your normal fangs, so if you upgrade your normal fangs, these guys profit from it. And it also creates a good barrier that can help out your fangs survive early on against something like a Vulcan or so. And then it also is good with marksmen and with Arclights, as it can stand in front of them and shield them from damage, and that helps the other guys doing the damage as well. And then we come on to the unit we have talked about quite a bit already, which is relatively common because it's really good from dealing damage from afar, and that is the Marksman. The Marksman, the sniper in the game, classic unit there. And as you can see, it has more damage than it has hit points, which is rather unique. And it can attack air and ground, and is really the class cannon, the basic vanilla class cannon of the game. It is good versus everything that is big, and especially things that it can one-shot, like sledgehammers, arclights, steel bolts, and it's also good against Overlord, when it can then just shoot them out of the sky. Bad against everything that is small, crawlers, fangs, and the spawned units of the giants, crawlers of the melting point, fangs of the fortress, or the wasps of the Overlord can really throw the marksman off. And it synergizes well with the Arclight, with sledgehammers, with fangs, and with Vulcans, like Arclights and Vulcans, because they take away all the small targets and leave the marksman with only the big targets remaining to shoot at. And sledgehammers and fangs, because they tank well before the marksman, so that the marksman has more time dealing the effective damage. And then we come to the next big boy, which is the Vulcan. A really cool unit that also synergizes well with the sniper, because it has an ability where it spawns one. And other than that, it deals a lot of flame damage against everything that gets too close. And that obviously makes it a really, really strong anti-small unit. And it also is relatively tanky, though not quite as tanky as the Fortress. And it obviously is good against fangs and crawlers, and also against mustangs, which also are relatively numerous and relatively low hit points. Especially if you give it the extra damage or the extra range, then it starts to really shine against the mustangs. It is bad against any single target unit. Melting points, steel bolts, marksman, phoenix do really good against it. And yeah, it synergizes well with the hacker. As I said, if it melts all of the small units away, the hacker can then focus on the big units. Same goes for the marksman and the phoenix. And potentially the melting point, but only in the late game when you can afford both, or if you have the giant commander. So you can get both cheaper, but obviously affording both Vulcans and melting points is really expensive, so that is just a really, really late game combo. When the Vulcan then takes care of all the small units and the melting point targets the big. And yeah, it is a pretty interesting unit for sure. Let's move on to the next one, which is the named Melting Point. And the Melting Point is a single target focused unit with a beam. The ability of the beam is that it starts weak and then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and then in the end it deals a hell of a lot of damage per second onto the enemy. So yeah, it was also a unit that snowboards really nice, especially when you give it the heal upgrade, and it really allows you in the late game to overwhelm enemies and then deal a lot of damage, as it also does tank relatively well as well, especially with the heal, where then you just can heal against the damage, which is quite powerful for these big units. And it is good against everything that is mega large. Rhinos, Vulcans, Fortresses, Overlords all get countered by the melting point real hard, and even other melting points get countered by a melting point quite nicely. It is bad versus everything that is small, because it needs time to set up its beam, and it is a bit of a waste of its single target damage. Even if you split it up against really small units, it's still not great. So fangs, crawlers counter it, and it's also the units that outrange it, like phoenixes and marksmen, and deals good single target damage, counter it as well. It goes well with the Arclight, which can crowd control all the other small units away, and the Rhino, which also kills off other small units in front of it. And then it also synergizes well with the Vulcan, as I explained, but only if you get into the really, really late game. And then we go over to the Rhino. And the Rhino is the strongest melee unit in the game. And it is really, really tanky for a 200 point unit. It also gets great heal abilities and does great damage against small targets, especially if you get the Whirlwind upgrade, but there's even without them, it does fantastic against fangs, crawlers, and mustangs. And it also counters Arclights, because Arclights just waste their shot basically on it. And yeah, that makes them quite nice there. It is bad versus Steel Bolts, Melting Points, and Phoenixes. Steel Bolts and Melting Points just melt it away with their beams, and Phoenixes it can't attack, plus they hit it really hard from a long range, so Yeah, the Rhino not great there, especially in the longer games. And yeah, and the general melee units dropping off a bit because they just become the focal point of a lot of damage and often get killed off in the later game before they get close to the enemy. You want to really level them up early, otherwise they just don't do much in the late game. And yeah, let's move on to the next unit, which is the Wasp. The Wasp, one of the 3 air units in the game currently, and it is the most numerous one with 12 unit models. And it is also the fastest one, 15 meters per second there. And it is a real fragile one though. And it is not really good against anything, per se, with its direct attack and hit point combo. But it is really good for flanks, and it is a hard counter to ground only combos. And that's what you want to use it often for. And it can just be really obnoxious to just fly around, hit the enemy, and especially catch enemy off guard and then go for a later air transition. It is bad versus the Fang, versus the Mustang, and the Arclight if the Arclight gets the anti-air upgrade, as then will shred the Wasps quite hard with its AoE attack. And it goes well in, especially in air only or heavy air combos in the late game with Overlords and other Phoenixes, as it can tank for them a bit against snipers or other Phoenixes especially. And then also can create really, really hard snowballs. If the enemy does not invest into AA early enough, you just can overwhelm them with so many air targets that even if they start buying AA at that point, they might just come too late and never get enough AA units into onto the battlefield to shoot it all down. So yeah, there is where the Wasp shines, outflanking and big air snowballs in the late game. And then we come to the Mustang, which is a high-speed unit with pretty good range for that, and which is also a relatively solid all-purpose unit, but it has low hit points. The low hit points are an issue, and it is good versus units that it can shred from afar. Wasps, the Fangs, the Crawlers, especially with the AoE upgrade. Against both of these, it is fantastic. And against the Phoenixes, with the anti-air upgrade, it is really strong as well. And yep, it is bad against anything that does AoE damage. The Arclight, it is also not that great against Sledgehammers, as it doesn't deal too much damage against them. And the Vulcan also can burn them away quite quickly. And it synergizes well with other fast units, Crawlers, for example. Does go well with... It also does go relatively well with Sledgehammers that can stay slightly behind them and then just have a lot of firepower. And Steel Bolts, which are also tanking for them and go up there in front, and it can kill all the small units in front of the Steel Bolts so that the Steel Bolts then can focus on the big ones. So yeah, Mustangs quite nice there. And then we come to our last unit, and that is the just named Steel Ball. Steel Ball with a fast unit, relatively short range, pretty tanky, especially shared over the 4 unit models. And having a beam that gets stronger and stronger and really melts units on the way, but it is ground only, unlike the melting point, so it can't counter the big air units. And yep, it is really good against Rhinos. It is pretty strong against Sledgehammers, Arclights, and Fortresses as well. But it is bad against all the small units, Fangs, Crawlers. It needs too long to get on target. And also, Phoenixes and Marksmen can really take their numbers away before they can do too much, especially if you don't have anything in front of them. That's why they synergize well with Crawlers, because Crawlers can take away those single target hitters away from them. So that is quite strong. And then Mustangs can stick behind them, can follow them up, can stick up with their speed. So Mustangs can be quite nice with Steel Bolts as well, as they also can then take away and mow away the small units in front of them. So yeah, those are the 16 units. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for you understanding all the different units and getting into this game a bit more. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye, and have a great day.